Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Tonight we are speaking about a couple of important topics, one being the CARES Act, which we'll talk about for a few minutes, and the Secure Act, which occurred at the end of 2019, and we'll be covering some important information related to those programs. And we will also be covering cybersecurity for this evening. Let me begin by talking a little bit about the Secure Act and then what's happened since then. The Secure Act back in 2019 changed a number of the aspects of retirement planning, including the age in which required minimum distributions were to begin. Fast forward into 2020 and dealing with the coronavirus epidemic, and the IRS essentially has hit the pause button. So July 15th is the new April 15th. That means that all taxes that were due from 2019 are now due in 2020. Instead of being done in 2020 in the first quarter, they're now moved to July of 2020. So July 15th becomes the new, if you will, July 15th becomes the new April 15th, and that means that any taxes that are due are due without any penalty or interest. From what we understand, at least so far, Q2, quarter two estimated payments will still be due at the same time in mid-July. And this applies to IRA contributions as well as other types of contributions. I believe health savings account contributions as well can be delayed until that time. So really it's kind of a fast forward to July 15th, and we pretty much will be looking at what we would have had for April 15th. Now, the CARES Act is a really important new piece of legislation that is providing a fair amount of support for Americans. You may have already heard about the types of employment assistance programs that have been put in place. Some things that have changed include not only W-2 employees, but also 1099 employees being able to apply for unemployment insurance. There have also been some changes with respect to the timeframes and so forth, so I won't go into a lot of detail. If that affects you personally, you probably know a lot about it. The one thing I do know is that the application process, given social distancing now, is an online process. There also have been some changes to retirement accounts. One thing that we have now is a new provision under the CARES Act that allows us to withdraw as much as 100% of on a loan basis from a retirement account, such as a 401k, up to $100,000. The limits prior to the CARES Act have been up to $50,000 and only 50% of account balance. The second part of it that is rather interesting is that loans from qualified plans have always had to be paid back in a 5-year period. That doesn't change, except that there is 1 full year in which no payments have to be made. So really, it becomes a 6-year loan with a 5-year amortization. With regard to required minimum distributions, if you or anyone you know has to take a required minimum distribution this year, you should know that that has been suspended. You do not have to take a required minimum distribution this year. And in fact, if you've already taken one, you can potentially reverse it. You could talk to us about how that would be done. With respect to student loans, there is some deferment right now of interest and loan payments during this period of time that we're in. And from what I understand, you need to approach the lender if you have such loans and to seek that relief. And then lastly, this is very fluid. Things are changing by the day. But there are 2 programs called the PPA and the EIDL program, which are also very important. They affect both small business owners as well as individuals who are sole proprietorships, consultants, and so forth, and also nonprofits. So there are two programs under the CARES Act, the Coronavirus Act, and they are these two that you list here, that are listed here. We will have further information about this available. It is fluid. For example, on the left side, you see the Paycheck program. It has already been updated, and the loan amortization is now going to be over 2 years, but the interest rate is down to 0.5%. So it's pretty fluid. The Paycheck program is really to replace wages. The EIDL program is both for payroll as well as other types of relief for things like accounts payable and other types of business expense. So back to cybersecurity. Let's talk a little bit about why we think this is an important topic, especially at this time. There have been many, unfortunately, breaches of systems that have exposed our financial data. And as a result, there's a great deal of information that is available to those who can exploit it, including sales of information and so forth on what's called the dark web. With this being the reality, it is nearly impossible to totally protect ourselves from the possibility of individuals who we don't want to have our identity information securing it. So what's happening? Well, if we think about where we are with respect to technology and security, this chart kind of describes where we are and maybe where we need to go. Today, for the average American, I would say we have pretty low knowledge of how all this stuff works, and also a pretty low level of security with respect to our devices. So what we need to do is need to move into that upper quadrant where we would be able to have a higher level of security and increase our knowledge with respect to what's really important around the area of cybersecurity. One thing we could do is determine and understand how well we understand all of this. And one way we can do that is through a short quiz, which we have already forwarded to most everyone through email. If you don't have it, we can forward it to you. But you need to really take a look at where you are. That's the starting point. And then learn the rules. Learn the new cybersecurity rules that we believe you should take. And then lastly, let's take action and not just make this an academic exercise. So here are the questions. I won't spend a lot of time on them here, but they basically allow you to really do a self-assessment on the kinds of things that you've done already, the kinds of things that maybe you might want to consider, and then score yourself with respect to where you are. The more protection you have, the better. So what are the new cybersecurity rules? Well, they include essentially 3 components the way we consider it. The first is secrecy. We live in a world where it's really difficult to have a great deal of privacy, but around these matters, it is really important. So what we suggest, for example, is that you create a secret email address for your financial accounts. What I mean by secret is that it's not one you share for other types of activities. In that way, only your financial accounts will be accessed through this email, and it would be much less likely that it would come into the public domain. What do we do here? Well, one thing is change the methodology that we often use for email. This type of email really shouldn't have your name in it. And I know sometimes we use our first name or our last name or initials so that when people see the email coming in, they know it's from us. That's not really required for a financial organization. So a strong email address that doesn't have any identifying information and a unique password are 2 things that would be very helpful. Now, there are some descriptions here on this chart about how to beat the password paradox. There is some further information that actually describes this in more detail, which we will send to you following up on, for those who participate, following up on this webinar. But for now, just keep in mind that there are things that you can do to kind of help you remember what might otherwise be a lot of characters that someone else would never think to try to hack. Unfortunately, what some people do for passwords is they use very common kinds of things: month and day, month and year, birthday, perhaps even the word password. And believe it or not, there are about 100 or so of these very commonly used passwords that anyone who's trying to hack your machine or get to your password already knows. In the space of literally a few seconds of time, their computers can run through all of them, and if they hit, they're in. So let's be more careful about what we do with our passwords. And as I said, the material will help you a little bit with coming up with a more sophisticated protected password. The next thing that we would want to do is consider some type of password manager. There is software that I know some of us use already that I won't mention the names of the software, but there are programs out there that will essentially keep your passwords for you. They will even provide a scrambled multi-digit password with different types of characters. And sometimes those can work very well rather than trying to come up with your own passwords, especially in situations where you have to change them frequently. One thing I will say is that an idea that you might think about is having the password phrase be something that you want to remember or remind yourself to do. For example, it might say something about taking a walk every day at this time when we're doing social distancing. Perhaps a little bit later in the year, it might remind you to call some friends or family members or do other kinds of things. So sometimes we can take that requirement of having to change passwords and actually use it to our advantage by having the password remind us every time we sign on to do some activity that we really want to take care of. Another thing that would be very helpful, and some organizations already require it, is what we call multi-factor authentication. So a multi-factor authentication essentially means that not only do you have to type in your email when you're signing into an account, but the financial organization or the organization that you're connecting with is also requiring that they send you a code. That code, especially if it is sent to another device like a smartphone, is another way to protect you. Because even if someone were to be able to get into your account and the additional code went to the same email address that they already had access to, that really doesn't protect you. So what this does is by having it go to a different device, that individual or that group that had taken over your identification would also have to have your cell phone, which would be highly unlikely. Another thing to keep in mind is that it is great that we have all of this free internet when we're traveling, perhaps through an airport or at a retail store, a restaurant, but oftentimes that is not very secure. So we advise against doing any type of financial transaction or anything that would potentially expose your identity in a public place. It's one thing to go on the internet and to check the weather or to go to a certain websites and so forth, but if you're going to be putting personal information in during that time in that portal, you'd be better to do that in a secure Wi-Fi environment. How do we do that? Well, for one, you could use a smartphone to create your own hotspot. Essentially create your own Wi-Fi network and use that rather than the public Wi-Fi if you must transact this type of activity. Another possibility is a VPN, a virtual private network. It essentially works like a tunnel, and while you're on the public Wi-Fi, the tunnel protects you because others cannot see what's going on inside the VPN. Very importantly as well, especially for those of us who are now in a situation where we're working entirely from home, is that our wireless routers also be protected. There are oftentimes instructions that come when we get a new router from the internet service provider. It has a device name, it has a username and password, and we don't change it. And it may very well be that that same information was put on a number of other boxes that went out. And in fact, it may be so common that the hackers know exactly what to do if they were sitting outside your door trying to break into your network. So what you do is you change that information and disable the WPS feature. The WPS feature is often thought to be very helpful because it's called push button access. Rather than having to have devices connect using a password, instead you just hit a button and you can connect the device. The problem is a chain is only as strong as the weakest link, I should say. And as a result, that could very well be the vulnerability in your system. Also updating firmware, and this is consistent throughout the presentation. Anytime a company provides firmware or software updates, we should take advantage of them. What those companies are trying to do is make patches for vulnerability that's discovered and also to do updates. The next concept is omniscience, and essentially here what we're trying to be is all-knowing with respect to our accounts. So the first thing I mentioned a moment ago is being able to have multi-factor authentication when we're signing in. Similarly, it would be a good idea for you to be alerted when certain things happened within your bank accounts. For example, being told via an email or a text that a withdrawal had taken place, especially if it's one that is very odd, so that you would immediately say, hey, what's going on here? This doesn't look like something that I did. Be in touch with the bank and find out if in fact someone had gained access to your account. Another thing to think about, again, that would be also very important to consider is freezing your credit. This is helpful because if someone were to get enough information with respect to your identity, they may very well try to create a credit card account that they could essentially charge a bunch of things on and then essentially walk away from, because you would be essentially responsible for the bill. So what we essentially are asking here is that you consider going forward with this type of protection. And by the way, nowadays children at birth are given Social Security numbers shortly after birth. Believe it or not, there is a level of cyber activity that goes on with children's Social Security. So if there are children or grandchildren or in your life or among people that you care about, you might suggest to them that that's another thing that they could potentially consider, is putting a freeze on any Social Security numbers related to children. Mindfulness has to do with just being aware. So what we mean here is making sure that you fix what are called bugs and security vulnerabilities. And the way to do that is to do the auto updates. I know it's annoying sometimes when you're in the middle of doing something and you get a message saying that your iOS software, your Apple software, or your Microsoft software, or some other program needs to be updated. Do go forward and update. If you can't do it right at the moment, use the feature that says, okay, I'm going to do that at a later time. Because what that does is provide a number of patches and so forth, which could be very helpful to you. Also, make sure you're using antivirus software as another form of protection. It may happen that your password becomes found and that someone is able to get onto your computer, that someone is able to install malware onto your computer, and then one day you go to sign in and there's a nasty message that says that you have to pay someone a certain amount of money to have access to your machine again. If that were to be the case, you may very well have to walk away from the machine because you really don't know whether or not you're ever going to be able to get your information back. So if you have a physical backup, a cloud backup of some sort, at least you protect yourselves as of the last time that you've done the backup. There is also, in mindfulness, a rule that I'd like you to think about, sort of a 10-second rule. It's a sort of a stop for a second. Don't open the email right away. Look to see if there's anything that's suspicious about the email. It could be in the subject line or the sender or the greeting line. It could be in the signature. Certainly if there's attachments that you're not familiar with, don't open them right away. Because what happens nowadays is that these people who are trying to put malware on our machines or try to steal our identity are pretty sophisticated. So what they will often do is put together a email address that looks like a financial organization or some organization that you're familiar with. In fact, if they've already gotten access to your machine, they may even try to look like or sound like they know exactly a lot about you, which really could catch you off guard. So make sure that you see the secure HTTPS insignia in the front of an email address, that, that lock. Make sure that beyond the www that you hover over it, because what that will tell you is what it really says. It may say the name of a financial organization, but underneath it may very well be something very different. Keep in mind that today we have a great deal of information right on our devices that we carry every day. It's not just on the PC that sits in our office, at home, or in the laptop that we carry. We often have a great deal of personal information, important information, very vulnerable information right on our phones. So in order to protect us, we need to be thinking about using the phones the same way we would if we were thinking about considering using our laptops. And that includes things like making sure that your mobile account has a PIN. What oftentimes will happen is if you drop your cell phone and somebody's able to figure out, because it's not locked, what your phone number is, they may call the provider and say that they need to change something on the account, and then they establish a PIN, and now you can't get in. So if you have your own mobile PIN account, even if they have your phone, if they don't know that PIN, they won't be able to do anything to your account. Having a passcode on your phone is important. And not just a 1, 2, 3, 4, very simple passcode. It probably should have, again, some upper and lowercase digits, maybe even a combination of numbers and letters to make it that much harder for someone who has a piece of technology to be able to run a whole bunch of potential passwords onto that phone to see if they can break in. Again, update your software and your apps regularly and back up. And if you don't have an iPhone, if you have a different type of device, you may need to add a piece of antivirus software. Typically, the iOS systems don't need this. And again, using the same kind of mindfulness, secrecy, and protection that we talked about earlier, make sure you're using a safe Wi-Fi connection and you're encrypting your communication. So with that, I'll stop for a moment and pause here to give everyone an opportunity to think about if they have any questions. I know we covered a great deal of material in a short period of time. We will be forwarding to you access to the slides themselves, as well as some further information with regard to the cybersecurity and the CARES Act, including some information for small business owners about the PPA and the EIDL program. So with that, I'll stop for a second and see if we have anything within the Q&A. I think we have one question that came in earlier with regard to whether the slides will be available, and the answer is we will make them available to those of you who participate on the program, so watch for those. They are all compliance approved, and so I can share them with you, and please let me know if you have any further questions when you get them. Let's see what else we have. Any other questions? Let me go back here and see what else we have. We have anything in the chat window? There is a question about email domains that are more secure than others, and the answer is yes, there are. I hesitate to mention email domains that are not secure because I don't want to be criticizing any companies, etc. But what I can tell you, for example, is that a Gmail address is a much more secure address than other types of addresses. One way to test would be have us send you a regular email with some type of information in it. All the email we send out is sent out with a secure, from behind a secure firewall and using a level of encryption. If you're able to get that email, it pretty much means that you're sitting behind a pretty good firewall when you're getting the email. If you're forced to go to our Smosh website, it means that the email outbound has essentially recognized a non-secure area or firewall and is requiring you to come through Smosh. So that would be one way to test. Now, when we send out information that we're trying to get out quickly and we don't want people to have to go through that, you'll see the word direct in the subject line of our email. That means that we're not sending that out encrypted. If you don't see the word direct, it means we're sending it encrypted, and you pretty much should know that. The question is, do the relaxed terms under the CARE Act do they apply rather to existing loans? And the answer is probably not. The idea is for new loans. That is kind of an unfortunate situation. If someone already has a 401k loan out, you're typically not allowed to take out another one. However, there are some relaxed rules about removing money from an IRA account. That may be a possibility of if someone needed to tap money, that they might be able to do that in a different way. And so that's something that you can follow up with us if that becomes an issue. Now, for all of our clients and friends, we have been emphasizing over the last couple of weeks that a very important thing to do right now is to remain calm, but also to be able to make sure that you have access to enough funds and that you are liquid enough at this time. So if liquidity is an issue, please let us know. We need to raise cash. I'm asking everyone to consider us in somewhere around a 60-day plan right now, planning for your expenses over that time frame, planning for your lifestyle over that time frame, remaining safe, and so forth. With regard to 529 plans, I think that there are some elements of the CARE Act that relate to 529 plans with respect to potentially accessing monies. I'm not exactly sure about that. We will follow up on that question, a very good question. And I'm sure there will be more questions coming up. Now, the PPA and EIDL programs, if anyone needs to take advantage of them, you should know that the PPA program for W-2 employers, that is begins on April 3rd, which is tomorrow. And for individuals who are sole proprietors or under a 1099 basis, that would be a week from now on April 10th. So again, a very fluid environment, and we want to try to help as best we can. There are some questions about cybersecurity related to Zoom. I guess that's making the headlines now as well. So what we would essentially suggest is that if you're doing a Zoom conference, that you follow certain protocol. There is, and I can provide this to anyone who's interested, Zoom actually has a pretty detailed level of security if you follow the protocol. It includes being able to know who's coming in to the Zoom meeting. It includes what information is being shared. And I know this because educational organizations are using Zoom for virtual learning, and they have essentially thought about this and have asked about these questions. So I'm not exactly sure. We always hear things going on, and sometimes it could be someone being very careless. So I don't really know more about that, but I do know there is a Zoom level of security that can be utilized. I'm not really sure about the next question about settings, but it is very possible that that is what your organizations are asking you to do to keep your virtual activity secure. We are living in a very challenging time, and because of all of the virtual activity that we're so forced to do right now because of the social distancing, it does allow for those who are trying to take advantage to potentially have a field day. So that's part of why we really want to focus on this topic. ask you to be very aware and remain concerned. But know that there's a great deal of work that's going on behind the scenes with many of these organizations to keep this type of activity secure. With that, I'll wait a moment, pause a moment just to see if there are any other questions. And if not, I know I've gone a few minutes over. We try to keep these weekly meetings to about a half an hour. So I don't want to go too far over in respect for your time. But I certainly thank you for participating. Please do pass along the information if there are others that you believe, or you think, I should say, could find the information helpful. Please let them know. And we do certainly care a great deal about you. So I ask you to please continue to be safe, be careful, take good care for yourself as well as all of your loved ones. Know that it is important, to keep the social distancing up, to cover, when you're outside as best you can, including your eyes, not just your mouth. And please, we'll get through this all together. So please do take care. Let us know if you need anything. And we will be presenting again next Thursday at 1 p.m. and 6 p.m. again. So do take care, and we'll look to talk to you all soon. Take care now. Goodbye.